Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Data and More webinar for Simcoe County and the District of Muskoka Labor Market Data. I wanted to let everyone know that the webinar is being recorded today and will be made available for viewing on our website. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Oh, it's great to see so many people here this morning. I would like to start today's virtual webinar with a land acknowledgement. And the land acknowledgement of all the Indigenous peoples' lands that we live on. While we meet today on this virtual platform, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of these lands on which we work, live, and call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. So thank you and welcome, everyone. So today's agenda, we have Tom Census, our consultant, will be debriefing us on a whole bunch of local labor market data, as well as Employment Ontario data and an employer survey. This is going to be about an hour and a half. We will be taking questions throughout, so if you do want to use your chat box just down at the very bottom of the Zoom window, we will be monitoring that and asking Tom questions throughout the presentation. So please don't hesitate to put them in there. We'll then take a short little break to grab some coffee. And then when we come back, we're going to have two additional guest speakers that are going to be showing us how to access more local labor market data in Simcoe and Muskoka, as well as updates from our office. So let's get started. Tom Census. For over 15 years, Tom has reviewed the LMI data, Employment Ontario data, and employer survey data throughout Ontario and Canada. His work has also taken him overseas to some interesting countries like Lithuania, South Africa, and Pakistan. And today we are very lucky to have Tom here in Simcoe County and Muskoka with us to help us understand what's happening locally with our labor market data. Again, we'll be monitoring the chat, so please pose your questions in there. And now let me introduce and take this off and introduce you to Tom. Tom, go ahead, take it away.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kelly. So I'm going to put up slides for the presentation. So I just need to get this going and started on the slideshow. There we go. All right, I'm assuming that's all visible.
Very good.
Okay. So as Kelly mentioned, I'm going to be talking about a number of items here. Most of it is over the last year. Well, actually, I should say, it's over the last 2 years, because the fact is, what's the fundamental event, as we all know, that has impacted our labor market and our lives has been COVID. And so while I'm going to be bringing you data that takes us up to January 2022, to give it context, I'm typically going back around 2 years to just before COVID to say, here's what the situation was just before COVID, and here's what's happened since. And some of the trends we can extrapolate to say, here's what we can start expecting as it appears, we hope, fingers crossed, that COVID is receding. We did just earlier this month get the first data from the 2021 census. So I'm just going to very quickly go through, show you some tables for population changes for all your municipalities. Then we're going to talk about the unemployment rates, how it affected different categories of populations. The employment numbers is we're going to look at some specific industries because some industries were hit differently than others. So we certainly know the accommodation and food service sector, for example, was devastated by COVID. So we'll make a few comparisons there. We're going to focus in also on establishments, on businesses, on employers. So we got some data on business opening and closures and business count numbers for Simcoe and Muskoka. And of course, there was a Simcoe Muskoka employer survey. So we'll give you some of the highlights there and then recap. As Kelly mentioned, please feel free to ask questions, especially if there's something unclear about a particular slide. Happy to try and address that. And then we're also just in terms of the overall, what does this mean? We're going to also open it up to questions and answers at the end. So let me start with the population changes. So as I mentioned, this is census data. So it's very recent. We have the figures, first of all, starting with Ontario, Simcoe, Muskoka. And I guess the important thing to note are the percentage changes. So I've compared the percentage changes between what happened between the previous censuses and now. So Ontario is continuing to grow in around the 5% range, actually higher now in 2016, 2021. Simcoe's growth has been substantial, as has Muskoka's, over 10%. So rising at increasing at a far greater rate than that for the rest of the province. And this didn't copy all that well. In any case, these are the specific municipalities as well as native reserve lands. And I've put them in sequence of the largest change versus the smallest change. So you can eyeball that to see that, well, there's 4 communities in particular that grew at a very large pace. New Tecumseh, Bradford, West Gwillimbury, Wasaga Beach, and Innisfil, each growing at over 18% over the 5-year period. And you see the actual numbers we're talking about. And you go down the list you get down to the bottom. So Barrie, for example, didn't grow at such a great pace, but Barrie, of course, is by far the largest municipality. So it's got such a large population already. It's kind of now got into kind of maintenance mode, and its growth rate was 4.5%. And again, you can look at all the rest. I'm not gonna go through each of them. You can see them. They also are all this data will be in Simcoe Muskoka's local labor market plan. For Muskoka, same thing. I put them in order of largest growth to least growth. And again, the same pattern as we saw in Simcoe, where the largest municipality will tend to have the lowest rate of growth because it's already got a large population, and to add to that base would require a large number of people. So Huntsville grew at 6.7%, still quite a large rate, larger than the Ontario growth. But places like, Georgian Bay, 37% increase. That's very significant, but with a small population base. Okay. All right. So let's now get into the labor market data itself. So we're going to start with unemployment rates and employment levels. So this first slide, what I want to show here. So this is the unemployment rate monthly. This is a labor force survey data starting from January 2020 to January 2022. And I'm going to first ask you to take a look at the gray line, because the gray line is the Ontario unemployment rate. And it's at the start, it's kind of behind the blue and red lines. What I want to illustrate here is how different the figures are between the Toronto CMA. So the Toronto CMA is what we would consider to be Greater Toronto. So City of Toronto, York Region, a portion of Durham Region, most of Halton Region, a few municipalities in Simcoe, but essentially, let's say the GTA versus the rest of Ontario. And essentially, when COVID hit, everywhere the unemployment rate increased, but in the Toronto CMA, it increased that much more. And in fact, at the early stages, the unemployment rate was 4% higher in Toronto than in the rest of Ontario. And that gap, as you shift your eyes from left to right, that gap starts narrowing. And then right at the end, of course, everything ticks up again in January 2022. That's Omicron. Now, Omicron actually hit in December, but the labor force survey is taken in in the second week of December. It's around December 11th to 15th in that week, something like that. So Omicron still hadn't quite, like we were just hearing news about this new variant, but it hadn't affected the labor market. So the trends were still going down. So the January figures are the first time we see the Omicron hit. And essentially every time we have a lockdown, the unemployment rate goes up. But it's also, I think, illustrative of the degree to which if you only focused on the Ontario data, you'd be missing another story, which is that the province actually has almost like two separate labor markets. So what happens in Toronto, what happens in the rest of Ontario, it has to do with the different mix of populations, far more individuals with with university degrees in Toronto, far more with college outside of Toronto. The lockdowns were much more severe, lasted longer in City of Toronto and particularly Peel region. So the impact was more substantial there. Okay, so that's monthly.
Yep. Sorry, Thomas. Sorry
no problem.
to interrupt you if that's okay.
Absolutely.
It's back a question maybe around the population and municipal data, but just what's the difference between Christian Island 30 and Christian Island 30A? Sorry.
So I'd have to look at a map, but there are, so we have what are called census divisions. So Muskoka is a census division, Simcoe is a census division. Then we have census subdivisions, which typically are municipalities or what are called IR Indian reserves is the term that's still used in the StatsCan data. And my understanding is that would refer to that there actually are two separate census subdivisions, Christian Island and Christian Island 38. Now, clearly, so I don't have a map in front of me, but I think we're talking about two different census subdivisions. I don't know geographically if there's actually a little island beside Christian Island. I'm not sure, but that's what it means. It's actually two different census subdivisions.
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
No problem. Okay, so this is the monthly rate. Now, the labor force survey is a survey. So it means you got a sample. And unlike the census, everyone is counted, right? But with a survey, you've got a limited sample. And as you get to a smaller geography and a smaller population, the sample is not as reflective. It's not as reliable. So when we get to smaller geographies, what StatsCan does in order to show us the data is it takes the data over 3 months and averages it. Okay, so if it reports in March, it's the 3-month moving average is actually the data for January, February, March. Okay, so I'm telling you this because as we start looking at data at a more minute geography, we're going to be using 3-month moving averages. So to show you what that means, we're going to start first of all, again, with the Ontario monthly figures. So what was this gray line in the previous chart is now blue here, and that's the monthly figure. The orange figure is the Ontario 3-month moving average to show you what happens to the numbers when we go from just a monthly to a 3-month. First of all, the impact of change takes a while to show up. So even though Omicron hit in March and we see the big spike in unemployment rate in the monthly figure in the blue line, the orange figure, it rises later, right? Because we're averaging out previous 3 months. And secondly, the peak is not as high because it's averaged against what happened before and then what happens after. So before, the unemployment rate was not as high, and after it dipped a bit. And so the 3-month moving average distorts it slightly. And I just want to show you how it distorts it. It kind of smooths out the more distinct changes that happen on a monthly basis. So that orange line is the 3-month moving average for Ontario. The only data that we have publicly available for Simcoe Muskoka is for Barrie, because it's sufficiently large that StatsCan provides it for what's again called the Census metropolitan area. So the Census metropolitan area for Barrie is Barrie, Innisfil, and Springwater. And so the green line, you can see kind of follows the orange in terms of the Ontario figures, except for this one spike from around November 2020 to March 2021. And I have to say, I mean, again, like, I guess we would need some other data to try and corroborate this. It could be that just because it's a smaller geography and the sample that is there kind of might have, because the sample changes or flips over every 6 months, that you might get a bit of a distortion. So I'm just gonna be cautioning folks about that spike. Everything else more or less follows in the same pattern, except that in 2021, the Barrie unemployment rate is always lower than the Ontario unemployment rate, but again spikes significantly at the end with the Omicron hitting in January 2022. Okay. Now, so I'm here comparing Barrie to Ontario. So now let's compare it to that other figure we had for rest of Ontario and Toronto CMA. And now again, this is all 3-month moving average data. So still, we see that spike in Toronto, the red line increasing, but not as high as it was in the monthly figures. This is the 3-month moving average figures. But once we're comparing Barrie to the rest of Ontario, you see Barrie pretty well follows that purple line, except again, there's that spike that we have at the start of 2021, which, as I said, maybe probably needs to be taken with a bit of grain of salt, okay? Because I'm worried about the sample size. All right. We're going to now look at some other figures, and I'm now going to give, these are all Ontario figures, but I want to look at specific population groups in terms of how they were affected. The biggest impact of COVID was on youth. Okay, and so this is the monthly unemployment rates comparing 15 to 24-year-olds and 25 and adults 25 years and older. So the green line is youth, and you can see that the unemployment rate, like in April or May, for youth reached around 33%. So 1/3 of youth who were in the labor force were unemployed. Of course, this has to do with the kind of jobs they were in. Working in restaurants or working in non-essential retail. Those were the jobs that were most affected by the shutdowns, more likely to be populated by youth. Youth typically, if you look at the January 2020 figures, so right at the start of the graph, you'll see that the youth unemployment rate was around 10%. The adult unemployment rate was around 5%. Historically, going back to the 1970s, the youth unemployment rate is typically around twice that of adults. But at the peak of the COVID, the youth unemployment rate was around 3 times that of adults. You see it dropping quickly, goes up again when we had the second lockdowns at the beginning of January 2021. Increased again, I think, at the start of summer as more youth started entering the labor force looking for summer jobs, and then decreased just like everywhere else. And then again, you look at Omicron and you see how much different the impact was on youth versus adults. Like that orange line from December 21 to January 2022 just increases slightly. That might be going from around 5% to 6% unemployment rate. Whereas the youth unemployment rate goes from around 8% to around 16%, like it doubles. It's a huge increase because, again, who gets closed down during the lockdowns? By gender, we know that women, when COVID first hit, it was apparent that women were more affected by COVID, particularly with those who had school-age kids or preschool kids, with daycares closed and homeschooling. Some women, we know the participation rate of women dropped, and initially also the unemployment rate for women was higher. So this shows that compares unemployment by gender, and I only looked at 25 years old and older because I wanted to exclude the youth figures. But we see how the female unemployment rate was often, 1 or 2 percentages higher than the male unemployment rate at the beginning of COVID. But then it kind of evens out, except for that spike in August 2021. But essentially, that kind of seemed to calm down those differences. But it certainly was apparent at the beginning of COVID. But by the end, and certainly in the last 6 months or so, the male and female unemployment rates have been the separation has only been by, several points of a percentage point, not even a percentage point in terms of the difference. And both male and female unemployment rates increased in the same way when Omicron hit. The type of job you had a lot of bearing in terms of how one experienced the impact of COVID on employment. Now here, I'm not comparing numbers, I'm comparing, because the numbers are kind of disproportionate. So let me explain what I did here. I took full-time and part-time employment, so the number of people working in either a full-time job or a part-time job. I took the figure that was present in January 2020 and gave it a value of 100. So in the case of full-time jobs, I think we had around let me just quickly check my notes here. We had around 600,000, 6 million, what am I saying? 6 million full-time jobs in Ontario. So that 6 million, I give it a value of 100. And every month after that, the number of employed people, I express it in relation to that 100. So if it drops down, that green line you see in April drops down to around 90, that means there were 10% less people working in full-time jobs than there were in January 2020. So it's a comparative ratio. So you see how it's all expressed in terms of January 2020. The same thing with the part-time jobs. So the red line is part-time jobs, of which there were around 1.5 million part-time jobs. So part-time jobs make up around 20% of the labor force. So that 1.5 million, but man, bang, so the real impact of COVID was felt among people who had part-time jobs. And who are we talking about? We're talking about, again, people who are working in non-essential retail, working in restaurants and other service occupations that rely more on part-time employment, okay? So in May 2020, you see it reaches around 65. That means around 35% of those part-time jobs were lost as a result of COVID. And then there's a recovery, but the full-time jobs already in around April or May of 2021, they're already going over 100. So they're recovering, excuse me, and reaching almost 105. So adding more jobs than what had been present in January 2020. The part-time jobs only got back to where they were in January 2020 in around December 2021. And again, just like what happened with youth, Omicron hits and bang, the part-time jobs, a much greater drop than among full-time jobs. Full-time jobs drop somewhat. And we're talking about more jobs in full-time category, right? As I said, it's around 4-to-1. 6 million full-time jobs, 1.5 million part-time jobs. But proportionately, far more part-time jobs were lost. The same applies when we compare permanent and temporary employment. And temporary employment includes people working on contract, includes casual labor, includes seasonal labor, people working as temp workers. Okay, and that category makes up around 11% or so of the labor force. Okay, but again, temp jobs declined more. But the other thing is, I think as an economy starts recovering, employers, when they're still not sure if the recovery is going to take hold, they will then hire more temp workers because they need workers, but they're not prepared yet to make the commitment on permanent employment. So as every time there's a bit of a recovery during COVID, you see the number of temp workers increasing more. And then as the recovery continues, it kind of drops off because now employers are hiring permanent. So there was a big, and then of course in 2021, part of that spike is also a big return of summer jobs. So the numbers go up substantially compared to the January 2020 figures, and then drops off as we go into the fall. And again, Omicron comes January 21, and bang, the figures for the temp workers drop off much more than for permanent workers. Okay, the last one is we can look at employment rates by the skill level of an occupation. Statistics Canada provides data for all occupations that are coded. There's hundreds of them, but in the coding, Statistics Canada identifies jobs by the education that is typically required as a prerequisite for that job. And there are 4 categories that StatsCan has created. One is jobs that typically require a university degree, so like various professional jobs like doctors and lawyers and nurses. All managers fall in that category. Jobs that typically require a college diploma or a trade certificate. So all the skilled trades occupations, but also technicians and technologists and police and firefighters. Jobs, then the 3rd category is jobs that typically require a high school diploma. So retail sales clerks, office clerks, food and beverage servers, material handlers, and then jobs that don't typically require any educational certificate or just some, short-term on-the-job training. So general laborers, cashiers, shelf stockers, food counter attendants, cleaners. Okay. So we're going to look at what happened to employment along these 4 categories. Okay, so the orange line are jobs that typically require a university degree. And again, I use that to compare, because the numbers are so different, I want to compare proportionately what happened to these jobs. So we start with that. What was the level of employment in January 2020? And that orange line actually is barely affected by COVID. There's a dip in June, July, August of 2020. It goes down to maybe 99. So maybe 1% of those jobs were lost. But as you can see, then the number just keeps climbing until it's at around 113 in January 2022. So it added, that category, university jobs, added around 13% of employment in Ontario during COVID since January 2021. All the other categories, if we go to the far right, we see all other 3 kind of coalesce in January 22 at around the 95, 96 point. So all other categories are still around 4 or 5% below the level of employment that they were in January 2021. The category that was most affected were jobs that typically require a high school diploma, the black line. They dropped down to, as you see, around 80. So that meant around 20% of those jobs were lost at the height of COVID in the summer of 2020, recovered somewhat, and then kind of stayed at a plateau. The college jobs didn't drop as much, but still dropped, and then also kind of plateau over time with some variation. The jobs that require no certificate, there's more variation. Partly, it's also a smaller category of jobs. If we look at that table below, we see that, say, in December of 2022, jobs with no certificate, we're talking about 400,000 in Ontario. Each other category is at least 1 million jobs, so it's less than half of any of the other categories. It's more varied because it tends to also include more seasonal jobs, again, those summer jobs that students may take up. And so there's big spikes all the time in the summer, and then it drops off. But it's just curious, I put up these figures to just show what the levels of employment were in these categories, December 2021 and January 2022, and what was the difference when Omicron hit. So Omicron hits and university level jobs add around 7,700 jobs. Every other category lost jobs. And the largest number of losses was among those no certificate jobs, over 16,000 jobs lost. But proportionately, because it's a smaller category, it has a smaller base, there's even proportionally even a greater drop in employment because it's a much more significant number. So simply to say, the long and short of it is that Omicron, COVID really impacted different occupations in very different ways. Okay, long-term unemployment. So long-term unemployment is individuals who've been unemployed for 6 months or more. And I first wanted to show you the annual figures. So, and I want to give you a historical perspective because it's important. The last time we had a recession was in 2008. So I go back to 2006. So prior to that 2008 recession, the around 15.1% of unemployed were unemployed for 6 months or more. When the recession hits, soon after that recession, as more people get unemployed, and as the recession takes time, we start having a longer recovery period after the recession, the number of people who stay unemployed increases, and the number who stay unemployed for a longer period of time increases. So we reached a peak of around 25.7% in around 2010, after the 2008 recession. And you can see how slowly it took for that figure to drop. Even around 2017, we had 20% of the unemployed were unemployed for 6 months or more. And we only reached the level of where it was at before the recession around 10 years later, right? And last year in 2021, we already reached 29% long-term unemployment. I just want to say that we are going to have it appears we may have a faster recovery. Of course, I mean, the things happening in the world, I mean, who can make any predictions these days? But we need to know that when we do have these spikes in long-term unemployment, they take a while to fall off. This is a very busy slide, and so let me explain it. There's two things I want to compare here. So this is the monthly unemployment, okay? So first of all, I'm showing, let's look at the blue bar. That's the number of people who are unemployed, okay? And we're going back to January 20. So the blue bar, so in May of 2020, we had almost 1 million Ontario residents unemployed. Okay, so it peaked around May, then it drops off, declines, and then of course January 2021 it goes up again slightly because of Omicron. The orange bar are the number of people who are unemployed for 6 months or more. And you can see at the start, it's not a large figure because when COVID hits, people haven't been unemployed that long. But as we get into the later part of 2020, the number starts rising and it stays high, and it drops off slowly, even as the number of unemployed starts dropping. The number of long-term unemployed does not drop in the same way. And so the red line shows the percentage of long-term unemployed. So when COVID hits, because there's so many people who become unemployed at first, the proportion of people who are unemployed for a long period of time drops. But as we get into the later stages of COVID, that figure increases substantially. It's up to, as you can see, 33.9%. So, around March 2021, a third of people who are unemployed had been unemployed for 6 months or more. It drops off a bit. It drops off more when Omicron hits, because now a whole bunch of more people become unemployed right away. And so the base figure is smaller, but we can expect that the proportion of long-term unemployed is now going to increase as the total unemployed drops, but people who are unemployed for a longer period of time is still going to stay high. This has all kinds of, as we know, with the new service system manager model that is coming forward, that the emphasis on focusing employment services is going to be especially on what they call the stream C, those who are at risk of long-term unemployment. Well, this is part of that figure. There are going to be a lot more people who qualify who are going to be targeted as stream C clients, because we are going to have more long-term unemployed individuals. Okay, so let me now get into employment figures by industry. And the first thing I'll do is show you for all employment in the rest of Ontario, the Toronto CMA and the Barrie CMA, the patterns. Again, these are 3-month moving averages. I give a figure of 100 for what the level of employment was in January 2020. Everyone had a dip. Again, because Toronto had the higher unemployment rate, it has a greater dip in terms of how many people are employed. The rest of Ontario, somewhat less, and Barrie less than the rest of Ontario. But then the recovery was faster in Barrie than elsewhere. But then we have that dip that we saw when the Barrie unemployment rate increases at the start of 2021. So its employment level is lower. Returns, like by the fall of 2021, Barrie is pretty well around the same level, getting close to the rest of Ontario. But for the last couple of months, the Barrie figures really dropped off. Even before Omicron, the Barrie figures were dropping off. So certainly, something to watch out for, a concern about, what level of economic activity we have in the Barrie CMA and how much that reflects Simcoe and Muskoka generally. In the rest of Ontario, the employment levels are just slightly above 100. So the level of employment is now slightly above where it was in January 2020. We're going to look at a couple of specific industries for these three same geographies, starting with accommodation and food services. So here, the drops were substantial. Again, looking at the Toronto figures, the level of employment in accommodation and food services in Toronto dropped to around 50. So they lost around half of their employment in accommodation and food services as a result of COVID. In the rest of Ontario, it dropped to 60. So they dropped around 40% of their employment, and it stayed relatively low. In Barrie, there was some drop, like it almost reached 80. So it's not nearly as severe, according to this data, as what happened elsewhere, and recovered significantly, was often over 100, sometimes reaching over 120 in the fall of 2020, and then again in the fall of 2021. then a drop off with Omicron. But what this data would show, and I guess what I'd say with all data is that, okay, here's what the statistics are telling us, but I think we also need to add some local knowledge to say, okay, is this what you were really experiencing? Is this what employers are telling us? But on the surface, it appears that the accommodation and food services was not hit as hard locally as it was in Toronto and the rest of Ontario. Construction, also kind of the same pattern, but even greater increases in employment in the Barrie area, and I would say I'm imagining in Simcoe and Muskoka. With the big push, of course, with we all know how people were fleeing Toronto and looking to purchase homes and shift their remote working to outside of Toronto. It probably did provide quite a boost to the construction sector, whether it's working in renovations or new construction. So employment increased to very much more so than anywhere else, to the point where in the Barrie area in around November, it's around 150, so it's around 50% higher than what it was in January 2020. It could be, again, because we're now looking at a narrower geography and focusing in on a narrower part of the employment, which is only one industry, that these figures are going to be more volatile, and they may not be entirely accurate, but all we can do is show you what the figures say. And as I say, I think, then use that as a basis on which to talk to employers to say, is this what you were experiencing in your employment? But on the surface, it appears that construction did relatively well in Barrie, and I'm extrapolating that to say to Simcoe and Muskoka as well. Wholesale and retail trade, here there's a much greater commonality to all three areas. They appear to kind of have the same trends. Towards the end, there's variation, and again, I don't know whether in the Simcoe Muskoka area, based on these Barrie figures, whether overall there's been kind of an economic downturn that is a kind of consequences what's been happening elsewhere in the province in terms of lower economic activity. But in the last couple of months, the employment levels in wholesale and retail trade have dipped much more than elsewhere. In fact, elsewhere it's been slowly increasing in Toronto and the rest of the Ontario. And in the Barrie CMA, you can see since around September, it's just been a steady decline, so that now it's almost at around 20%, below where it was in January 2020. And finally, there's a category of business building and other support services. So this would include temp agencies, would include janitorial and cleaning services, landscaping services. Those are the major categories I can think of, but back office support of various sorts. I'm really struck how in this category, Barrie figures are astronomically low compared to what was happening in Toronto and the rest of the CMA. I didn't want to I could show you, like in April 2021, it actually dipped to around 20. So around 80% of employment was lost in this category. So I don't know whether the extent to which employers were not relying on temp workers because there wasn't enough demand, and there wasn't enough demand for office cleaners because people weren't going to offices or whatever. But the impact locally seems to be far, far in excess of what happened in Ontario, and the rest of Ontario and Toronto. Again, a smaller category, smaller geography, more volatility to the survey numbers, but it's certainly something one would want to explore, because there's a consistency where it's always been lower throughout this whole period. The employment rates have been lower than elsewhere. So certainly a big question mark about what was happening in that category. Okay, So another way of looking at the figures of what happened was to look at how businesses were faring. And Statistics Canada has started to track data on business opening and business closures. Okay, so let me explain this graph. So we're going to first of all talk about active businesses. So an active business, StatsCan characterizes an active business as any establishment that has an employee, even just one employee in that month. Okay. So I'm going to ask you to look first of all at the blue line. So the blue line is, you can see it shows up in various places because it's often covered up by the other colors. But essentially the pattern is like starting in January 2020, if we're at 100 with the blue line, you can see that the figures increase during the summer because we have more employment in the summer. We have more businesses getting started in the summer. We have seasonal employment. I know this is seasonally adjusted, but I think there's still more employers around during that time. And then it kind of levels off, the blue line levels off. Well, the orange line is what happened in 2020. So again, the numbers, before COVID hits, the orange line was increasing ever so slightly, but then it dips. So, and that dip down to around 91 means that around 9% of them establishments did not have an employee in that month when they did have an employee in January. So we're talking about operations that closed. Doesn't mean that they went out of business, but they just shut down their operations. And then there's a recovery, but we never get back to 100. The green line is when this takes it up in 2021, where now we do start seeing a recovery, and we do start seeing the numbers match the same pattern as they existed in 2019. Now, we would actually hope to have more business, like we have a slightly larger, as the population is growing, we expect the number of businesses to grow. So the fact that we're only at where we were in 2019, I mean, that's good, but it's not great, okay? And in terms of actual sectors, again, I want to go to accommodation and food services because they're the ones who are really affected. And the chart on the left is that same active businesses as we're showing for all businesses. I'm only showing the 2020 and 2021 figures, again, to show what a huge decline there was. So it dips to below 75. So that means around 25% of these establishments did not report having an employee in May compared to what was present in January. And then there's a very slow recovery. And the green line is the figures for 2021. We only have these figures don't come out in as timely a fashion as what we have with the employment figures. So we only have it here for September. But you can see that the numbers kind of plateau around that 95 level. So we're still, during this whole period, there's around 5% fewer establishments in this category of accommodation and food services than there were in January 2020. The chart on the right shows you, drills down further into the dynamics, because the number of active businesses is kind of a balance between how many businesses are opening, which means they've now added an employee, and how many businesses are closing, which means they went from having an employee to having no employees. And normally, those figures, the number of openings and closures usually are almost in sync, okay? Businesses go out of business, like restaurants go out of business and then new ones open up all the time. So you look at the January 2020 figures and the green and red lines are on top of each other. COVID hits and we still have some openings, but my gosh, the number of closures, these are actual numbers of businesses, around 2,000 of businesses in accommodation and food services reported they had now no employees. Then the number of closures goes down, the number of openings go up, and so you start getting some recovery. But the huge number that were lost at that time never gets the same kind of green spike. The green figures go up a bit, but it's nothing close to how huge the spike was, which explains why the figures stayed low. There's still businesses, as I said, there's still businesses opening, but even later in the year, we still sometimes have periods where we have more businesses closing than we have businesses opening. The other thing I wanted to focus in on, and I think I showed this last year, and now I've got figures for now 2 years. So I wanted to compare how restaurants, sit-down restaurants did compared to fast food restaurants. So we don't have the data at the employment level for that. But one way to look at it is there's other Statistics Canada data, and this is their receipts. How much did they make? And so in this chart, full service, so that's the sit-down restaurant where you sit at a table and someone comes and takes your order, is the blue line. And the orange line are limited service, so that means you get your food at a counter or at a takeout window. And I'm going back to January 2019. So the restaurants and fast food are almost the same, just fast food has slightly more business than restaurants do. It has more establishments, but they kind of follow each other. But when COVID hit, it's the restaurants that really took took the greatest losses. Yes, clearly you can see that there were losses among the fast food restaurants, but significantly more. Like the restaurants lost around 80% of their business, and the fast food restaurants lost around 40% of the business. This is even though, as we know, there's a lot of people who are using a lot of takeout, but because you're not sitting, you're not sitting down even at the fast food place, you're just doing it through the window, their business actually did go down. And I think this is important also just in terms of employment because of the nature of the jobs that these two different kinds of establishments have. A restaurant has a far greater range of jobs, right? We have servers, we have cooks, we might have chefs, we have hostesses and hosts, we have more managers probably in those operations. There's different pathways for advancement, whereas the fast food restaurants are far more reliant on primarily food counter attendants. So different kinds of employment, so different categories of individuals impacted. I wanted to also just focus a bit on retail trade. We know that retail trade was impacted in two different ways. We had essential stores that we very much relied upon when the lockdowns came, and then non-essential stores that were closed. So the retail sector did not have as many closures. So the orange line is what the loss in business is. So we're down to around 90, so around 10% of stores. And the recovery has come, and it's come back to a bit over 100, right? It's hovering a bit over the 100. So there's been some recovery. But again, just like with the food and services sector, in the food services sector, you've got variations by categories of stores. And again, I've gone to the sales to illustrate that point. And I know I showed this slide before last year, and now this is a continuation. So I took 4 representative categories of retail stores. So let's start with the blue one. The blue one is clothing and clothing accessories. So those were shut down, right? They were non-essential. And you can see that their sales in April were under 20% of where they were in January 2020. Huge loss. Get back to around the 90 level, and then 2 more dips because of different lockdown periods or whatever, and they've only recently kind of got back to over 100. But imagine all the revenue that was lost during this period. And this is another thing, I guess, one of the lessons of COVID is that some of this damage, it's not just happens at that moment in time, but these businesses, if they were going to stay in business, probably had to go into debt, had to take out more loans. And so now there's this overhang of debt as they come back and start recovering and start getting revenue, but they're also saddled by having to pay interest on loans that kept them afloat while their businesses were closed. more or less happened, the same thing happened with automobile dealers, and they were non-essential, huge loss at the beginning. They recovered sooner and returned to their previous levels faster. The orange line is grocery stores, right? So, March, April, you see the huge spike in grocery store sales because that's where everyone was going, and a spike in the liquor stores, right? The green line is the liquor stores, and we see the spike in both those categories stayed significantly higher. Like there never was really a drop off, never dropped off under 100. I think last year I made the joke about something about, I'm sure a lot of us did field research on this. I stood in line at liquor stores a lot. I can tell you that I think this data is reliable. I did see an increase. Okay. In terms of actual numbers, we have data that it's called the Canadian Business Count. So every 6 months, the Statistics Canada does an actual count of how many establishments are operating. They use administrative data, so tax data, and also there's another survey that's called the Payroll, Employment, and Hours Survey of Hours, Employment, and Payroll. One of the other. Anyway, so they use that also to count the number of salaries. It's when you look at the methodology, it sounds like it's virtually like almost a census of all establishments that's performed in June and December of each year. And it's broken down by industry and by number of employees. But StatsCan always cautions us not to use these figures in a longitudinal way. And what by that I mean is like when we look at those opening and closing data, they say, don't compare, June 2021 to June 2020, because sometimes how we collect the data may change and so on and so forth. And at the start of COVID, they say, really don't do this for COVID because this administrative data takes a long time to change. Even if a company goes out of business, it doesn't show up for a while because there's all kinds of legal processes before their number gets taken off the rolls. Or if businesses just close temporarily, it's not going to show up in this data. So they say, do not use this data to compare what happened to businesses. Well, I still thought we should take a look. And I can tell you that last year when we made the comparison, it didn't look like anything had changed. And I thought, okay, I see their point. But this year, after a year and a half of COVID, there do appear to be differences, okay? So here are and so what I'm showing here is what were the changes in each of these cells between June 2020 and June 2021. This is with Simcoe. And maybe the first thing I'll do is I'm going to ask you to draw your eye down to the second to bottom row. So the row that has the green arrow. And I've just added the net change in each of these categories. So essentially, we had an increase of 36 firms in the category of 1 to 19 employees. But we had a decrease of 111 firms in the 20 to 99 category, and a decrease of 18 firms that had 100 or more employees. And to put that in context, the line below, so that has the red arrow, I'm showing you the changes the year before, and you can see in each category there was an increase. It might even have only been a small increase, like just one more firm in the 100 plus category, but across the board there was an increase. But here we're seeing there was an impact, and I think the data shows it. And as I said, and if you look at, let's say, accommodation and food services, which is the fifth line from the bottom, you can see how many more firms were lost in that 20 or more employee category. And where we know where some of the big impact was. On the other hand, like you look even at construction, and there was a large decline in firms in Simcoe, which is kind of surprising. Okay, so that's Simcoe, and this is Muskoka. Far fewer firms, so fewer changes in each of the categories. So you see a lot of zeros there, but still, we go to that bottom line at the green that I've highlighted with the green arrow, the net change, a loss of around 6 firms of 100 or more employees, and a loss of 19 firms in the 20 to 99 category. The increase of 84 in the 1 to 19 includes companies that just downsized, that got much smaller. So they go from a larger category into that smaller category. But you got to think that that also signals that there was loss of employment. Okay. Okay, let me quickly do some Employment Ontario data for you. As Kelly mentioned, I think I've done this for around 10 years with Simcoe and Muskoka. I've made presentations on the Ontario Employment Ontario data, and I got to tell you, some years it's the changes in the categories is like it's 1% change here, 2% change there. The numbers tend to be extremely steady. I could virtually take a presentation I did and use almost the same language and just change a few numbers here or there for 2015 to 2017. It didn't make a difference. And but boy, last year there was a change. So the way I wanted to express this was to look at all the major categories of clients and show you, first of all, the client numbers. Now, I don't expect you to read these client numbers, but I want to at least give you the evidence. Okay, so we're looking at 4 categories: employment services assisted clients. We're looking at literacy and basic skills new in-person learners. We're looking at the number of second career clients, and we're looking at the number of new apprenticeship registrations. And I've given data for the board level. So the board is Simcoe Muskoka. The region is Simcoe Muskoka belongs to the central region. So that means Peel, Halton, Toronto, Durham, York, Simcoe Muskoka, and then the Ontario figures. And I've given it for the past 4 years. Okay. Now the column to the right is what I did is I took the I took the client figures for those first 3 years. So 2017, 18, 18, 19, 19, 20. I took those first 3 years because there's a little variation. I took the average for those 3 years. And then I took the figure for 2021 and I said, what percentage of that previous average is the most recent ones? So all of which is to say, if we look at that first line at the top, it says 53%. It means that the number of assisted clients at the board level, the 3,184, that was 53% of what was the average of the previous 3 years. Okay. So now once you know what that figure is, if you kind of just go down that whole column, you could see that in all instances, most of the time, the decline was, roughly from 60 to 70%, usually around 60%. So sorry, that wasn't decline, but that there was around 60% of the clients that one had experienced for the previous 3 years in almost all categories. There's literacy and basic skills. It did a bit better locally, 75% compared to 66% at the region level and 67% across Ontario. Second career clients, really small numbers, right? We're talking about less than 100 people. So there, the variation wasn't as great. Certainly not at the local level. There was almost no change in the number of second career clients. But everywhere else in the region and Ontario, there was a significant decline. And overall, we've had a steady decline in the number of second career numbers. And the apprenticeship numbers really all dropped and all around, roughly around 60 to 63%. We had, because apprentices, you couldn't have, in-person training. So the numbers declined all across the board in terms of the client numbers.
Tom,
Yep.
sorry, we just have a question about the LBS numbers for 2017, 2018. Just wondering,
Oh, that's definitely an error, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
They look really low.
Yeah. So absolutely, yeah. So I'm sure that's a typo. Yeah, sure. Yeah, because it's certainly, you look at everything else, right? And it's all in the same range. So I bet you, well, I'm probably missing a 1,000.
Okay.
There's probably a 1 comma that's missing.
Okay. Okay.
Wow. Boy, kudos to the sharp-eyed person who found that. Good.
Nancy West. Thank you,
Wow.
Nancy.
Good. Okay. We have a special door prize for you. That's great. Okay. Thank you for that. Just a couple of things I want to point out. I'm not going to go into details on the data, but on the EO assisted, so Employment Ontario assisted clients, employment services clients, first table at the top is the share of the unemployed by age group. And I want to focus on youth. So 15 to 20-year-olds, they typically make up around 30% of all unemployed, even though they're a much smaller portion of the population. Like 15 to 24-year-olds do not make up 30% of our population, but they make up 30% of our unemployed. And in 2020, they made up 33%. So it increased, okay? But it is interesting that in terms of the EO assisted clients, so the second box, but which I've broken down by going back 3 years, that in fact the numbers hardly changed. Certainly at the board level, it was in 2018, 2019, youth made up 21%, and that following year 22%, last year made up 21%. But at the region and Ontario levels, they actually dropped. They dropped around 4, like they made up a smaller portion of the unemployed, of the assisted clients, even though they made up a higher portion of the unemployed. I think this, the likely explanation is that, well, they know they can't find work because the restaurant's closed. They're not hiring. And of course, some people are saying, I don't want to work under these, circumstances. I don't feel safe, perhaps. But all in all, again, not only were the youth more affected in terms of how much their unemployment increased, but also they didn't make as much use of unemployment services. Well, actually, I guess the other thing is you also had many adults who previously have not experienced unemployment to the same degree. And so they probably also made up a larger portion of the client base than youth, because the youth have not flocked to Employment Ontario services over the last few years. They've made less use of Employment Ontario services compared to their share of the unemployed because they do a lot of stuff online, right? In terms of outcomes, just a couple of things to point out. So I'm comparing 2019 and 2020 to 2020-21. So the 20 to 2021 is on the left-hand side. And I've just put in a couple of arrows here. So the green arrows, simply to say that outcomes that were full-time employment dropped. Outcomes that were part-time employment dropped. They're not huge, but still 3 or 4% in both categories. And what increased was the unknown categories, and again, across the board. So you could see that the unknown went from 8% locally to 14% locally. Like that almost accounts for the difference in the employed drops in employed figures. Just didn't know what happened to the clients. Yes, there's been, and everywhere else, there's been, there's slight changes. There's one or 2 percentage points changes, but this is where the larger changes were in terms of outcomes. So that's for Employment Ontario. And the same thing applied for literacy and basic skills, although more so just on the part-time employment. Again, we're not talking about big changes. It's like around 3%. But certainly the number of unknowns really increased substantially, particularly at the local level, right? It went from 16% in 2019-20 to 26% unknown outcomes. So, those are just a couple of things that caught my eye when I was going over those figures. Okay, so in the last remaining time we have, I just want to run through the Simcoe Muskoka Employer Survey. So we had around almost 200 employers visit the survey. Now, what's really important is to emphasize that this survey was done between mid-October and end of November. So Omicron didn't even exist or wasn't on our radar at all. We certainly had a view that we're coming out of this whole period. On average, we had a bit over 150 responses per question. So, a good number. We had many more people from the manufacturing sector. We had more firms with over 20 employees than compared to their share of all establishments. So we actually had around 1 in 7 firms that have 100 or more employees. So of all firms who have 100 or more employees in Simcoe, Muskoka, 1 out of 7 of them participated in this survey. So we said, okay, what was the impact of the pandemic on your employment levels? So at the top, we're going to look at the top row first. So around 18% said we had a large decrease in employment, and another 25% said we had some decrease. 44% said we had no change, and 14% said we had an increase, and whether it was large or some. Okay. So clearly, obviously, the largest category was decrease because it's 18 plus 25. One of the things I wanted to show with this chart was how, again, different that experience was depending on the size of the establishment. So the smallest firms, from 1 to 4 employees or 5 to 19 employees, had the largest amount of decrease, and large firms had less decrease. That's simply the point of this, okay? That there was certainly a variation by size, and partly has to do, again, with small restaurants and small stores. If you're talking about those clothing and accessory stores, they're typically going to be, under 20 employees. So it's going to show up more there. We asked them since the lockdown was lifted. So again, I'm emphasizing this is October, November. We said, how has your employment changed? And particularly by the skill level of the job. And essentially they said, it's pretty well stayed the same. Like most of them, over 50% say, whether it's entry level, mid-level, senior level, they say employment since the lockdown has changed the same. Where there has been change, it's more likely to have been an increase. So, the left-hand bars, and certainly slightly more increase in employment among the lower skilled jobs, among the entry-level jobs. But there are firms, even after the lockdown, that were experiencing a decrease in employment. Okay. And then we said, okay, looking forward 3 months, what do you expect in terms of employment? And here we see a much more optimistic view, okay, that even though they may not have hired as much, but in terms of what they see for the future, around over 40% in each skill category, except for the senior levels, are saying, yeah, no, we expect that we will be increasing, okay? And certainly far fewer are saying we expect to decrease. Like the decrease is that kind of brownish bar, so it's around 7, 6, 4%, okay? And yes, we can't rely on that anymore because we had Omicron, but I think what this does say is that as they look to the future, as these things get lifted, as we get back to normalcy, most of these employers expect to be hiring as we would expect as we're coming out of these hard times. Everyone's been talking about skills. And so we asked the question about skills, and we asked it in 2 ways. First of all, we talked about their current workers as well as job candidates. Okay, so that's one distinction we made, asking about the skill levels. And then we asked about 2 types of skills enhancement. So reskilling is where you're adding new skills to someone's repertoire. And upskilling is where you're taking a current skill they have and raising the level of that skill. So those are 2 words that have come into our vocabulary now as a result of COVID. A lot of people are talking about skills, and so what does this tell us? Well, I find it kind of surprising. First of all, there's a lot of expectation that we asked, do you feel your current workers need reskilling or upskilling? Do you feel job candidates are lacking the kind of skills you need or lacking the level of skills you need? And across the board, all these employers are saying, yeah, we need more reskilling, we need more upskilling. they're not necessarily saying this in a, like what they typically say is, well, we somewhat agree that they need more skills. And it's sometimes I look at figures like, because these are, first of all, we're talking about their current workers, and the message they're giving is, our current workers, need more upgrading of skills, and it's not much different from the job candidates. Like in the past, employers would be spending much more time talking about what they perceived as the deficiencies of job candidates. But you look at these results, and you've got employers who are saying, we've got skill shortages across the board. And I have to say, I kind of, wonder about that, because we've had so much talk in the media about skills. I sometimes wonder whether that starts impacting how people respond to surveys, that there's almost an expectation. It's hard to imagine that the huge number of people who are employed, this huge labor force we have out there, all of a sudden, somehow it's viewed that they're lacking in skills in work that they've been doing for the last 10, 20 years. Okay? So it's something I would really want to push further on to kind of probe, what are we talking about? We did probe a bit, so let me bring some of that up. We asked them, okay, what categories of skills are most of a concern for you among job candidates? And we gave them a rating where if it was rarely a concern, it got a figure of 1. If it's sometimes a concern, it was a figure of 2, and a major concern was a figure of 4, I think. Sorry, I'm forgetting now the scale, but the point is the relative ratings for each of these categories. The top stuff that they're most concerned about are still employability skills, whether these people have the habits of work, of punctuality, of taking direction, of being able to their attendance levels and so on. That still remains the top skill, but it's very close to also the technical skills that are necessary for the job. Those are the 2 items that receive the highest ratings. Leadership skills and working independently were kind of close. And then, other soft skills like adaptability and customer service skills and working in a group and training skills, essential skills, right? So it kind of drops off, not greatly. But what is amazing, because I think the thing with COVID was one of the things we all started talking about was, digital skills, because now we're doing so much more stuff online and so on. And actually, it was the digital skills about which the employers had the least concern compared to everything else, right? Which I find kind of striking, because that really was what a lot of the literature, a lot of people were saying, we're now doing a different kind of work, and surely digital skills are going to be a necessary part of that. But employers are saying, yeah, no, when it comes to job candidates, I don't have a great concern about their basic digital skills. And we kind of, again, we probed the digital skills stuff generally. We said, if we look at different categories of digital skills, are these an absolute requirement? Are they nice to have, or is it not a requirement? And the things that employers really are looking for, they want to make sure that job candidates are comfortable working with mobile apps and devices, handheld, devices. And we want to make sure they're comfortable working with basic office software, about the whole suite of spreadsheet and word processing and email software. Those are the things that we're most concerned about. And those are the things that most people actually have. But people, have phones. They know how to navigate on screen to a large extent. I'm not saying everyone, but there's a fairly high level of basic digital literacy among the workforce. And again, there certainly are categories of workers where there's they do need some skill enhancement. But I'm saying it's not. Those are the types of skills that the employers are looking for. Certainly things like, big data skills, like being able to manipulate large data sets, or coding skills. Yes, it's sometimes nice to have, and for certain occupations, it's an absolute requirement. But overall, it's not an expectation. Even things like the virtual meeting skills, like being able to, manage a meeting such as today, or social media skills, knowing how to, knowing one's way around all the different social media platforms. These were not as highly rated as kind of those basic skills around office software or mobile apps and so on. Okay, remote work. So as we all know, when COVID hit, there was a good portion of the workforce ended up working from home. So let me explain how to read this chart. So we asked employers, we said, what percentage of your employees worked from home? And we asked about before COVID, during COVID, and what do you project once COVID is over? So let's look at that. First of all, to the extreme left, we have the blue line where it says 95%. What that means is that 95% of employers said that before COVID, around their workers worked from home around 0 to 20% of the time. Okay, so very small proportion, who are working from home, right? Because if we move over to that blue line in the middle where it says 3%, that means 3% of employers said that our employees were working from home 30 to 70% of the time, and only 2% said that our employees were working from home most of the time, like 80 to 100%, right? During COVID, which is the orange line, we now see that actually, again, I'm going to go to the extreme right, around 27% of employers said that 80 to 100% of our employees were working from home, okay? Or their employees are working from home 80 to 100% of the time. And then we say, okay, so what do you see in the future? Well, it's a green line. So again, I'm going to go to the left. Now the proportion who are saying most of our workers are going to be working in the office or in the workplace has dropped from 95% to 79%. And it's not that they're going to be working from home all the time. What they're basically saying is now around 19%. So there's been a 16% shift, are saying our workers are going to be working from home around 30 to 70% of the time. So around 16% of employers, like almost 1 in 6 employers, are saying we're now shifting from workers being not home to being home 30 to 70% of the time. This is that the hybrid work we're talking about, sometime in the office, sometime at home. This is really important, right? And because it has all kinds of implications. I can tell you, when we look at, let's say, downtown Toronto, which was the magnet for so much of the commuting that's done in the GTA. If you have around, a reduction in 30% of the employees are coming into offices, the implication that has for office space, for all the services that support those workers, that provide coffee during breaks or lunch during, meals during lunchtime, and all the other services that happen as a result, it means a real transformation in terms of not only how work is done, but all the other businesses that support the capacity of people to be able to work away from home. Now we're going to have to be focusing much more on how people work from home. So I think I think there's going to be a lot of ramifications, and I'll come back to this point in a moment. Because what we did also ask employers, we said, well, what do you think about this remote work? What kind of concerns might you have? And again, we had a rating scale. They got if someone agreed with a point, they got a +1. If they strongly agreed, it was a +2. If they somewhat disagreed, it was a -1. Strongly disagreed, it was a -2. So the long and short of it is, their concerns about remote work is they're certainly concerned about their ability to properly onboard new employees. If a lot of people are going to be working remotely, We are concerned about how we bring in new employees and train them and get them, to understand our corporate culture. There was a concern about the team spirit, concern about kind of collective innovation and creativity that takes place when people are interacting face to face. Those are the things that worry employers around remote work. They were less concerned about whether their employees had a proper workspaces at home, I guess, because of COVID and so on. People adapted, even though, so often it was makeshift, but that was not as much of a concern. We asked them, do you think people were as productive working from home as they were working from the office? And they were kind of, well, they weren't even agreeing. They were slightly agreeing that they were as productive. They weren't disagreeing with the notion that they were productive. Are you concerned about insurance and liability issues if people are working from home? That was also low on the radar. And we said, do you see cost savings by having people work from home? And actually they disagree. No, this is not, whether it's not part of their calculation or whatever, but they said cost savings was not a big issue for us. The big issue was the kind of collective spirit of working in person together physically, and the ability to onboard new workers. Okay, so let me just now recap.
Jessica.
Yep.
Good, thanks. How are you?
Oops. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't realize that.
Oh, sorry. Can
the
we
way.
make sure? I'll just make sure everyone is turned off. Sorry, Tom.
Oh, that's okay. Always like to hear a friendly voice. So in terms of the recap, it's clear that there were sharp increase. We all know there were sharp increases of unemployment and significant drops in employment levels, but there were significant differences, whether by geography, right? I showed you the Toronto versus the rest of Ontario. There were definitely differences by the demographic category, right? Youth especially were more affected. We don't have as good data, but certainly because of the way our workforce is distributed, we can certainly say that especially newcomers were more affected. In fact, we do have unemployment data on newcomers that their employment rates increased more than elsewhere. People of color, their unemployment rates increased because there's a higher proportion of them working in the kind of jobs that were impacted. We saw the differences by industry and by occupation, especially, jobs that require a university degree were hardly affected by COVID. Jobs that required high school or less were significantly affected by COVID. And so that's the impact on the lower skilled occupations and people in precarious work. So if you're working part-time, if you're working temporary work, you experience the impact of COVID much more significantly than others. We've shown some of the impacts in terms of businesses and how the recovery has been uneven. We still have a combination of food services that are below the number of establishments that were present before COVID hit. And the other point is that, looking at some of the losses that some of those categories, the clear example was, those clothing and accessory stores. If you've lost that much revenue for a long period of time, even though then your revenues come back to where they were before, you're not getting enough of a surplus to cover all that you lost. And so the overhang of the loans and other financial supports that businesses needed means that they're in less a position to then expand. They're now dealing with having to pay what they've borrowed as opposed to being able to borrow to expand, to increase their business. They're just trying to stay afloat. And I think that overhang of that financial hit is going to play out in our economy for some time, including consumers who also had interruptions of earnings. And we see statistics now, especially as the price of the inflation starts increasing, people already feel they're at the at the limit in terms of their ability to spend, and they're like half of the households now say they have real concerns about being able to cope with the increasing cost of living. So it just tells us that we're in a very fragile moment, even though we can see some optimism about recovery of employment. But the balance sheet is at a precarious state for businesses and for individuals as consumers. And during the survey, we asked employers, okay, is there anything else you want to add? And all of them said, my gosh, I'm having such a hard time finding job candidates, right? And I know all of you are familiar with this. And I'm going to speak to this in a later point, but certainly to acknowledge that even as this recovery has been taking place, there's been tremendous shifts in terms of who's available for work. Partly, if you can, just thinking it through, people who, let's say, worked in a full-time restaurant and they were laid off, yes, they may have relied on CERB, but they might have also said, you know what, I'm going to now look for work elsewhere in a different category, in a different industry. They find employment, and now when those places open up again, those individuals aren't coming back, in addition to others who've made other choices about going back to school and so on. So the pool of workers, I'm sure, for a number of these jobs is shrunk. And at a time, there was a time when one could say, well, maybe CERB was partly the cause, but it's not the cause anymore. There has been, people have made choices about, have made decisions that have gone elsewhere, and they're not available anymore for that work. So there really is an issue now about shortages of job candidates in certain categories. The survey also talked about, higher expectations employers have about skills, what kind of digital skills you're looking for, and how they respond to remote work. And the one thing I'll say about this thing about onboarding and worrying about, this lack of collective spirit, like employers are saying, we're worried that we won't be able to instill the same sense of corporate culture to get them to understand our way of doing things, and the cumulative effect of having groups of people problem solve. But the other side of this, which I think is really important, and especially for you who are employment counselors, people are not going to feel as strong an attachment to their employer if they're working from home, if they don't have those social connections. I think we're going to see even greater volatility in terms of people's movement from one job to another. And so I guess that if employers are having a hard time finding job candidates, and if they're going to have a hard time holding on to job candidates, I think it's really important for employers to think about, how do I become an employer of choice? What is it that I offer, whether it's in terms of wages, but also in terms of working conditions, in terms of predictable hours, in terms of benefits, in terms of all these other things. And again, I mean, this has been coming out through all the literature and so on, but it's going to have to become part of the conversation, because the tables have turned in terms of the balance of who's being wooed here. We were always trying to find employers to find job openings, but now employers are in a pickle trying to find candidates. And as I'm saying, I think workplaces that where people don't feel attachment to the employer are going to have a great deal of difficulty. And so I think employers will be looking for more help, not only around recruitment, but also around retention. And it's almost as if many of them are going to need almost like HR kind of assistance, and not just kind of what's available through a job board. Here, let me pause there, because I think we're close to the end, and I want to make sure that in terms of some of these themes, we have a chance for people to jump in and either make a comment or ask any questions. So Kelly, I'll turn it over to you to kind of MC the next portion of this, but happy to take any questions.
Yes, thank you, Tom. So we'll open it up to the group. We don't have any other questions sort of ongoing in the chat. So, and I can't always see everybody's hand that's raised. So if you want to just unmute yourself and jump in, that's fine with me. Any questions for Tom? Stuart, I do see you. Go ahead.
Thanks, Kelly. This is a great presentation. Thank you, Tom. The organization I represent, Perry Sound Muskoka Community Network, we're funded by FedNor, and one of the programs we offer is adopting technology. And during COVID, the demand for businesses who could not get employees and were therefore adopting technology went through the roof. Interestingly enough, we had a demand for 3 times the dollars we could give out, whereas our other sister organizations across the whole of Northern Ontario struggled to spend their money. So we're trying to understand whether there's some dynamic in the Muskoka and Perry Sound and or Simcoe regions that was different from our colleagues up in Northern Ontario, or I guess other parts of Ontario that you deal with. Do you have any insights for us?
It's hard for me to have a read on how Northern Ontario was like the difference between the impact of COVID on Perry Sound and Muskoka than on the rest of Northern Ontario. It seems to me in some instances, and you would know better than me, that Muskoka and Perry Sound their lockdown decisions were followed more what was happening in Central Ontario, whereas Northern Ontario had operated slightly differently, I think. And so my first thought would be, because all the data seems to show it's the lockdowns that impacts the changes, right? And so that's because I would have thought that there wouldn't be that much difference in terms of interest or take-up of technology between those areas. I think it has to do with how COVID may have affected it. The other one would also be that obviously Perry Sound and Muskoka would still be more affected by migration of people coming into the area, far less so than say North Bay or Sudbury or Thunder Bay, right? Because they were not going to receive as many migrants from people leaving from Toronto to change lifestyles. People were still going to go to places like Simcoe and Kawarthas and Muskoka. That'd be my first off the top of the head guess.
That's great, Stuart. Thank you for that question. Anybody else? I'll go through the list here. And please just unmute yourself and go ahead if you do have a question. All right. Oh, Stuart, we've got another.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't want to hug the questions, but if somebody's while they're thinking of a question, there's a different question perhaps you could help us with, Tom. Is we've had anecdotal evidence that a number of people moved into our region, turned their cottage into a full-time home because one or either spouse could now work remotely, which was not an option before. And we also have anecdotally quite a few businesses, because of the ability to work from home concept, are using employees from India or otherwise that they've taken on where they can't find employees in the area. And I'm just wondering, is there any way of tracking whether this is just a minor indicator, or is there significant data around people that either are working from home and are not on our radar screen for data because the company they work for is outside the region, or vice versa, and or employees that they're drawing on that are out, are hidden, so to speak, because they're out of the country or out of the province?
So two things. First of all, you were saying about people who've, say, taken on a cottage and turned it into a full-time home and are working from home. We would have data that could reflect some of that, and that would be what's called tax filer data. That's where we get granular data on movement. So let's say at a Muskoka level, we'd be able to show how many people have moved in, as well as how many people have moved out, whether they've moved from elsewhere in the province, or whether they've moved from outside the province, or whether they've moved from outside the country into the area or not. And it can be broken down by age categories, which is also helpful because Muskoka gets a large portion of its people coming into the area who are 55 years and older. And I have looked at that data because it's tax data, so we're looking at annual data. So we have data for 2020, and there's been some change. I wouldn't say there's been dramatic change. I think the real numbers are going to show up in 2021. That we'll see more of that, right? Because as people saw, I think if COVID hit in March, they weren't going to necessarily. I know some it was a heating up of the marketplace, but I think that took time in terms of numbers showing up. So I think that's where we're going to see some of the numbers, and so that data would tend to come only, I think, has to be at the end of the tax year. So I think we're talking about, probably the fall of 2022 or even the beginning of 2023. But in terms of remote work, so I know around 2 years ago, we have asked questions sometimes about recruitment on employment. We asked last year this question on recruitment, and we said, how much more broadly are you recruiting? And I have to say, we didn't see much of a big spike. We thought we would see that employers were saying, yes, now we're looking beyond, kind of the commuter catchment area. There wasn't as much of an increase, but of course that could change. Sometimes these changes take time, but that's the only way we could probe that. There's no quantitative data that I could point you to that tracks that kind of thing that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting concept, overseas workers, and how do we tap into that? So interesting. We've got a couple of comments in the chat. Sherry, she's just wondering if the reason employers are not worried about digital skills is because of the number of digital natives born in the time of the onset of the internet, and they've basically just been born with the keyboard. So
yeah, that's right. I think the degree to which now, let's say even with smartphones, I mean, smartphones were not as common, say 5 years ago, maybe, certainly not 10 years ago, but now, we acquire those skills because of our everyday living. So I think there's including, of course, obviously people who are born into these skills. So yeah, it's kind of part of a package. And I will, okay, and I will just add this, that even where people are deficient in some of these skills, what is required is probably can be remedied in a couple of weeks. We're not talking about months. So even if we're talking about skill shortages, we're talking about pretty discrete, like limited skill shortages. So I perhaps you might hear me, I get exasperated with the degree to which employers feel there are skill deficiencies. First of all, so many of us managed to start working from home, and we didn't have to go back to college to do it, right? So.
Yeah, no, thank you, Tom. Any other questions from our audience?
I just have a quick question, if I could, Kelly. Thanks. Thank you, Tom, for the presentation. Appreciated. I know that we all are seeing fewer youth and, talking about the pandemic because of that, perhaps, or causing that. Do you have any insight into going through all of this data, what is going on with the youth, and whether there's any bits of information we might glean to help us attract them again?
Yeah, so as part of the labor force survey asks an incredibly rich array of questions. It's not just whether you're employed or not. And one of the questions they ask is if you are unemployed, how are you looking for work? And it includes, whether it's publicly funded employment services, whether you're looking through classified ads, in all these categories. And it's really kind of interesting because that you can look at that data going back, I think even back to 1976 or 1990, whatever it is. But like we got several decades of data, and starting in the early 2000s, every survey has a category that says other. And that other was very low, like in most surveys, I think it was 1 or 2%. And then like in the mid 210s, it starts mushrooming because we didn't have a category for online searching. And I think that, you know, and if we're talking about, you know, who has the digital skills, who's glued to their phones, if it's not our kids at dinner time, that's how they're also doing their searching. So they're using other means, than more so than any other age group. And I think if we broke it down, I think they're the ones who had the biggest drop of not attending. I think that data is broken. You can break it down by age, and I think you would see that youth in particular, there's a drop off in how much they make use of publicly funded services.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mary, and a evident gap in the market. So yeah, that's very interesting, highlighted. All right, any other questions for Tom this morning? All right, well, Tom, thank you very much. That is a really extensive overview of a lot of that labor market data, Employment Ontario data. And again, the employer, insights are really interesting. I think as the title of this is a path forward out of COVID, but it seems like COVID's gonna be affecting us for a little time longer. So we will have a copy of the slides, and we will be making this into a video presentation and available on our website. So we will, if you will join me in saying thank you to Tom, and a little round of applause virtually for Tom. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
We will be taking a short break until about 11:10. So 10 minutes. If you want to turn off your videos and your mics, go grab a coffee. We'll be back at 11:10 with some more interesting ways to find local labor market data. We're going to have two guest speakers with us, Hannah Conroy from the County of Simcoe and Jennifer Lamentia from the Workforce Development Board in Peterborough to tell us more about those data sources. So have a great break, and we will see you back here at 11:10. Thank you. Everybody. I'd now like to introduce you to Hannah Conroy. She's a Senior Economic Development Officer with the County of Simcoe, and she's here today to tell us a little bit more about the Work in Simcoe website and the job reports that you can find on the site that will be helpful in your service planning in the future. Please note, we will be monitoring again the chat throughout the presentation, and you can pose your questions anytime in that chat, and I'll make sure that Hannah is aware. So thank you very much, and Hannah, over to you.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you to Kelly and the Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board for the opportunity to be here today to talk about workinsimcoecounty.ca. So just to start, the Economic Development Office at the County of Simcoe works collaboratively with our 16 member municipalities, the cities of Barrie and Orillia, and various service providers to help businesses thrive and grow. We do have a 5-year economic development strategy for years 2021 to 2025 that has goals, objectives, and action plans to address various challenges and opportunities. Goal 2, as shown on the screen, is through an excellent quality of life, education, and careers, Simcoe County attracts and retains talent to support the needs of its thriving business community. So the Work in Simcoe County website and several supporting initiatives are certainly aligned with this goal and objectives in the plan. So what is Work in Simcoe? So workinsimcoecounty.ca is a one-stop shop website that was launched by the county and area partners in June 2020. So it was launched in collaboration with our 16 member municipalities, the city of Barrie and Orillia, as well as the Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board. The user-friendly site includes several unique features such as career exploration tools, local success stories, a job board, and resources for job seekers and employers. The website uses an automated fetching tool to aggregate thousands of job listings from popular career sites, which alleviates local employers from having to enter their job postings on multiple sites. So essentially, the aggregator pulls from, a list of over 20 major job boards. So the Indeed, Workopolis, Job Bank, etc., as well as a lot of the local Employment Ontario job boards. And as long as an employer posts their position on one of those job sites, it'll automatically display on Work in Simcoe. The site also has the ability to map job opportunities. So you'll see on the left-hand side here, there's a list view, and you can apply different filters such as location. And then the same jobs are also available in a map view, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, which actually maps out where the job opportunities are located, and you can apply additional filters. I know it's very small, but you can apply additional filters such as Employment Ontario, libraries, immigrant services, etc., to see how and where you can access those services in relation to where you work and live. Also under the Career Exploration tab is a tool called Edge Factor, which is also a partnership with the Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board. And it provides interactive activities for various STEAM careers, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, including a focus on the skilled trades. One of the great things about this project is that the local school boards are actually partners as well. There's 25 high schools in the region that are using this tool in their classrooms. And eligible businesses can also create free profiles with information about their companies, which is a great way for local companies to share information on their opportunities directly with local high school students. The Work in Simcoe County website also aids recruitment efforts by highlighting which jobs are in current demand with monthly reports, labor market reports that I'll be covering in more detail shortly. And it also includes a wide array of resources for job seekers and employers, such as how to access apprenticeships and cooperative learning opportunities. If you ever have suggestions for additional resources to be added to the website, either for job seekers or employers, please do connect with us. So there are two main reports on the website, the job demand report and the job search report. Firstly, the job demand report includes information such as job postings by month, job postings by municipality, job type, so full-time or part-time, job duration, so permanent or contract, job posting by skill type, and this is using the NOT codes, top hiring employers by number of job postings, and more. And I will go through a sample job demand report shortly. Secondly, the job search report collects information on those interacting with the website. So the monthly job search report is created using data collected from the job finding tools on the website. So it shows information such as the types of positions that people are seeking based upon skill level and job type. It also shows, who's looking at the website by location, by age group. Your first time entering the website, there is an optional question to indicate your age. So that's how we get some of that information as well. Also, excited to share that as of today, there's a new report available on the website called the Skill Demand Report. And this summarizes knowledge, skills, tools, and technology terms found in job postings. For example, I did a quick search for January 2021 to December 2021, so last year. I didn't specify any specific occupations, just a general search. And the top skills found throughout last year were, number one was customer service, being mentioned 17,747 times in job postings. Secondly was management skills, being mentioned 17,451 times. And third being sales, mentioned 11,312 times. But yeah, this report is available on the website now as well. One of the unique things here is you could actually filter by a specific occupation. So maybe you want to look for skills throughout the last year, but specifically in administration occupations, for example. I'm just going to go over to the website quickly, so bear with me for one moment, and I'm going to walk through the job demand report. Okay. So this is the Work in Simcoe page here. There are a couple different ways to access the job demand report and job search reports. Here on the main page, you'll see there's quick links here at the bottom: job demand report, job search report. Also, this is the job board that I was mentioning. Today we have 3,425 active jobs on the website. You can also click this All Tools button and it will show the various reports that I've just talked about. So we've got job demand report, job search report, and skill demand report. But for the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to focus on the job demand report. You'll see when you're on this page that you have two options. So you can go to an interactive report, which allows you to apply specific filters. So maybe you want to look at jobs posted specifically in Collingwood within a specific occupation. There's also the printer-friendly report, which is a PDF version for the current month. Also, you can scroll down here and look at all of the past reports. So we've got the reports from 2021 as well as the reports from 2020. I'm just going to quickly go into the interactive report here. Okay, so this is the month of January 2022. This is the interactive report. Sometimes takes a second to load. I apologize, usually doesn't take this long, but I'm having some connection issues today, I think. So I'll just go over to the printer friendly report. It's the same information. So here on the main page, you'll see there's a good summary. So in the month of January, there was 9,343 active positions on workinsimcoecounty.ca. 6,698 of those were new this month. So there will be some positions that may carry over month to month. The average length of a job being posted was 18.4 days. There were 2,620 companies and 29 different job boards were aggregated from. This is in every monthly report, which is just a great summary of the job number of postings, number of new postings, and number of hiring companies for the current month, but also all of the months since the site's inception. And I'm just going back to this interactive report, bear with me. Seems to be loaded now. One of the great things about the interactive report is you'll see these three dots here that say more, and you can actually export this into a CSV file. And you can do that for any of the data points on here. So it also breaks down the job type, so full-time versus part-time. So 88.2% were full-time, 11.8% were part-time. It also breaks down the geography, job postings by municipality, job duration, so permanent, contract, or temporary, job posting by skill type. And again, this is using the NOC code. So in the month of January, sales and service occupations was the top skill type with 1735. Trades, transport, and equipment operators and related occupations was second with 781 positions. Third, fourth, and fifth are all very close here with business, finance, and administration occupations, occupations in education, law, and social, community, and government services, as well as health occupations. And again, on the interactive report, you can export this data. There's also a list of the top hiring employers and agencies, and this is by number of postings. So you'll see here the Simcoe County District School Board with 141 postings in the month of January. You'll note there are some duplicates here, and this is because the municipalities may differ. So for example, the Simcoe County District School Board had postings in Barrie. They also had postings in New Tecumseh and Bradford, West Gwillimbury. And on the interactive report, you can toggle through the 3,342 companies. Also, there is information on top occupations by skill level, frequency, and duration. So this is using 4-digit knot codes. On the next page is 3-digit knot codes, and on the following page is 2-digit knot codes. So there are the different levels there available depending on what you are looking for. So we have retail salespersons, home support workers, housekeepers, and related occupations, other customer and information services representative, registered nurses and registered psychiatric nurses, retail and wholesale trade managers as the top 5 for the month of January. And again, here we've got the same thing, but we're looking at the 3-digit knot code here. This as well shows the posting count, the average posting length in days, and the median posting length in days. And here we are with the 2-digit national occupation classification right here. And on the final page here, we also have information on job postings by job board and companies by job board. So Indeed was the most popular job board with regards to the number of positions being aggregated onto work in Simcoe with 3,026, followed by CareerJet at 1,393. But you can see a complete list here. And I know we've got some of our Employment Ontario partners on there as well, which is great. One thing about the way the aggregator works is an employer only needs to post on one of the positions or one of the job sites, sorry, for it to display on work in Simcoe. So there might be employers posting on multiple, but it only needs to be displayed once. So at a high level, that is a sample job demand report. The interactive report is a great way to export some of the data as well. And now that it's loaded here, I'll just quickly show you. It seems like there's something going on here. I apologize, but you can filter, for example, by municipality here. So if you just wanted to look at Collingwood, for example, and you can also search by knot code, and it will generate the same report for you. I'm just going to go back here. So that is the job demand report. It is a great tool. One of the things that we're really excited about is we're actually going to be adding some new features to the job demand report very shortly. It's going to have additional information, probably starting next month, including top hourly wages in job postings, top salaries in job postings, top in-demand skills. So pulling that information from the skills demand report. Key job requirements. So how many times is having a driver's license mentioned in job postings? How many times is having a first aid certification mentioned in job postings? As well as language. So what language skills are employers looking for? So that will be launching within the next month, as well as a jobs newsletter. So all of the information that you see on the jobs board with regards to new jobs being posted, you can subscribe and receive these directly into your inbox. And our Ontario Works team is also leading the launch of a new training board and career calculator. And the career calculator is focused on helping people understand the ROI for going back to school to pursue a second career or entering a new career. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much for the opportunity. I know that was a lot of information and there's a lot of data there, but certainly if you ever have any questions about the reports, you can connect with our office. There also is a contact form on the workinsimcoecounty.ca website. and happy to answer any questions.
That's great, Hannah. Thank you. I will turn it over to our guest today and go through just to see if there's any hands up. There are no questions in the chat, Hannah. But again, we will make your slides available to everyone post event. So, and of course, it's available online, so they can just log on anytime.
Exactly. Well, thank you again, Kelly.
Thank you, Hannah. All right, well, next up, we have Jennifer Lamentia with us. Jennifer is the CEO of the Workforce Planning Board in Peterborough, but she's working on a very cool project in Muskoka, along with our SSM and of course the Workforce and Literacy Planning Board. And so I'd like to introduce Jennifer to tell us a little bit more about the LMI help desk that's available in Muskoka. So Jennifer, over to you.
Sorry, just before you start, Jennifer,
Oh,
sorry to interrupt, but I was just looking at the chat and it looks like it's disabled, and I'm not sure if it's from my end or yours, but if you're not getting any,
Oh,
that'd be part of the reason.
okay, thank you for that.
Okay.
Let me just hold on then for just a second, Jennifer, just to see if anything
No
is
problem.
bubbling up here.
It's not just you, Charlotte. It's disabled on my end too.
Sorry, guys, we're just checking. I don't want to miss anything, so I'm just going in the back end. Just give us a second. Okay, well, we're still in the back end of Zoom, trying to discover. I will just stop. Thank you, Charlotte, for letting me know that. I will just pause for a minute and see if there is any big questions, just with regards to the work in Simcoe County before we move on. Just double checking here.
So Judith just sent me a direct message and I have received that one, Judith. So if that helps, but it still says chat disabled.
If you do want to speak, just on the bottom, there's the reactions button, and you can just raise your hand on the reactions button or lower your hand if you're done. So until maybe we reactivate the chat, if you wouldn't mind just putting your hand up like that if you have a question, and we will get to you right away. Thank you. So Jennifer, sorry, we don't want to miss any questions though for you either. So
yeah, no, I appreciate that, Kelly. So I guess just in terms of, I'll share my screen and get started, but probably best then to save questions. It's only, what, 5 minutes, and then we can watch out for the hands going up that people are using the, yeah, that sounds good.
that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, super. Yeah, so I guess I'm set up so that I can share my screen. So I'll do that. And thank you very much for that introduction, Kelly. So I'll just get started here and hopefully this will work. All right, so is everybody able to see the screen? If you can't, or maybe somebody can do the thumbs up.
Yeah, we can see you.
Excellent, thank you. We'll get started here then. So as Kelly mentioned, thank you again for the invitation to share the information about this exciting project that we have underway. And as you can see from the sea of logos on the screen, truly a number of partners involved in this project. And so I thought before we dive in to talk about the labor market information or LMI help desk, I'll just give you a little bit of background on the project just to provide some context. And as Kelly mentioned, Workforce Development Board is based in Peterborough, but we also serve Haliburton, Northumberland, and Kawartha Lakes. And WDB actually launched our help desk back in 2016 because we were receiving some enhanced funding as a local employment planning council. And then in 2021, through an Ontario Labour Market Partnership funded by the Ministry of Labour Training and Skills Development, we had the opportunity, or have the opportunity, to expand our help desk and also to support the launch of the help desk at the various workforce planning boards in Eastern region. So just in terms of expanding our help desk, we worked very, very closely with Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board to expand our help desk service to include Muskoka. And the reason why both workforce planning boards felt it very important to do that was we wanted to be able to help provide and to support and serve Fleming College, Muskoka Kawartha's service system manager. And so it was great to work in partnership to be able to make that happen. And then, as I mentioned, we were able to help support the launch of the help desk service throughout Eastern Ontario. So we worked with Centre for Workforce Development Board in Belleville, Eastern Ontario Training Board in Cornwall, Eastern Workforce Innovation Board in Gananoque, Labour Market Group up in Renfrew Lanark, and Ottawa Employment Hub also has a help desk service. So now that we're talking about the help desk, if you haven't used the service yet, you're probably wondering, what is the help desk service? So fingers crossed, if someone could give me the thumbs up, just so I know you can hear the sound. I did set it so you can hear my sound, but it's a terrible thing to watch a video and not hear it. So here we go.
In the fast-paced world that we live in, navigating the job market can seem daunting. Whether you're looking for a job, hiring, or simply need information about your local labor market, we're here to help. The Labor Market Information Help Desk provides free local labor market data, making it quick and easy to find the information you need for career choices, hiring decisions, labor market trends, and more. Visit wdb.ca/lmi-help-desk for more information. This Employment Ontario project is funded in part by the Government of Canada and the Government of Ontario.
So that was a really short promotional video for the help desk, and it was actually one of the collaborative marketing initiatives that all of those partners you saw on the screen worked together to make that happen. And hopefully from that 30-second clip, you understand that it is a complimentary service. It's an on-demand service, and it's used heavily by economic developers, by employment service providers, literacy and basic skills providers. Certainly educators use the service, employers use the service, even job seekers use the service. So a real range of community partners and stakeholders are using the help desk service. And you can see from the screen a number of different questions. Whatever question they have about the labor market or the local labor market are emailed to helpdesk@wdb.ca, and they'll receive a response. So, you know, for example, economic developers may want to know about employment by sector or what sectors are expected to grow locally. Employment service providers are often reaching out to us if they're working with a client to obtain information on a particular career pathway and the demand for that specific occupation. And we definitely hear from employers frequently asking for wage data to confirm that they're competitive locally. So next screen here will show you some of the ways and means that people are using the service. So whenever there's a grant application or a call for funding is available, we receive a lot of requests. As you can appreciate, many grant applications have a section within the application that look for evidence for the project itself. And so certainly those would be the kinds of questions that could be sent into the help desk service and processed. Education sector definitely uses it, K-12, post-secondary, especially at the K-12 level when they're developing some new specialist high skills majors programs, and to support their business planning at the, say, the OEAP coordinators when they're building those business plans. And as I mentioned, we do provide information to assist employment and literacy service providers when they're working with clients. And media and journalism has also been, particularly during COVID, a huge user of the help desk service to help inform their reporting, the stories that they're writing about the local labor market. And on the right-hand side is just a quick snippet or sample of what the actual processed request looks like. So you send in an email to the help desk with your question, and then you'll receive in return, in a very timely manner, an actually, very professionally produced report that has been completed by someone with the expertise. Our labor market information analyst completes these requests. And you can see from this, there's also a link to a survey, because we want to get feedback from users of the help desk service so that we can continue to improve if needed. But I can tell you that we've received some really, really great results. 82% of the people completing the survey have indicated that they're very, very satisfied with the service, and the other 18% are satisfied. So lots of positive response. Some of the comments that they make are things like the information is delivered in a timely manner. It saves them time, but it's the local aspect, the local labor market information that's important. And I should mention that the labor market information analyst uses a number of different data sets to complete the processing of the request. So he has access to some custom sets from Stats Canada, also the MC Burning Glass data set, Vicinity Jobs, Scott's Directories. And you can see in this particular example, it makes reference to the hiring demand in Muskoka for carpenters, and it references something called the Local Jobs Hub. And I know that Hannah has provided you with an excellent demo of the Simcoe Working in Simcoe tool. This is a similar tool. And the reason I'm showing you this is because this is also part of that Ontario Labour Market Partnership project. Our job board aggregator is called the Local Jobs Hub. And WDB, again, because we were receiving enhanced funding as a local employment planning council, we actually launched our job board aggregator tool back in January of 2020. And then we worked really closely in partnership with Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board to make sure that the job board aggregator tool also included Muskoka. And again, because we wanted to make sure that we met the needs of the service system manager for the region, so Fleming College, for the Muskoka Kawarthas area. And this particular regional job tool collects job postings from over 35 online job boards. And one of those job boards I should mention is the Fleming Employment Hub job board. So all of the employment service providers working for the SSM use something called the Fleming Employment Hub when they're working with employers to post job postings, and those are aggregated in this tool. And so you get, for an employer in the Muskoka Kawarthas region, posting to, and as Hannah mentioned, anyone posting, in this case, to the 35 job boards that we aggregate, they'll increase their visibility of that posting because it will show up on the job map tool. So as a job seeker, you can add a filter for transit routes in Huntsville, for example. And if that's important to you as you're doing your job search, you'll see that on the map, and it is very interactive. This is just a screen capture of the map. And then of course, you can also view it by listing, and you can filter at the level of the district municipality of Muskoka, and then of course at the municipal level. So if you're looking for jobs, let's say in Bracebridge, you can drill down to that level as well. And I know when I jumped on and joined this meeting, Hannah was providing you with a demo of the job demand reports that are available through that tool. Similar interactive reports are available for Muskoka through the job demand reports that we have linked on our website. And I also want to mention for any of the employment service providers joining today that at the beginning of each month, we send to the service system manager the individual static reports, so the PDFs for each of the 5 areas covered by the service system manager. So the service system manager will receive a report from Muskoka, and then that report is then sent out to the individual employment service providers for the Muskoka area that are working with the SSM. So Agilic, Employment North, and the YMCA Simcoe Muskoka should be receiving those reports from the SSM. For anybody who is interested, there is an interactive version of the report available, and you can filter by Muskoka. And then the interactive report will, as Hannah demonstrated, really did a great job, but we'll show you the in-demand skills for Muskoka. We'll show you a listing of the jobs by NOC. And also then we actually even include in there the hiring demand by sector. So at the 2, 3, and 4-digit NAICS is available as well in the interactive version of the report. So I appreciate that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but I think that hopefully provided you with a high-level overview of the help desk service, who's involved in the project, and how you can use it.
That's great, Jennifer. Thank you. I think the unique thing about the help desk is that it's, it's really a personalized question you submit and you get a personalized response, which is really quite unique and certainly very useful in any service planning. So I will open it up. I believe the chat, we've got the chat back mobilized. So if you do want to pop your question into the chat, if not, please raise your hand and we can open it up for any questions for Jennifer.
Do you want me to stop sharing the screen now, Kelly, if that would be easier so people you could see?
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, don't see any questions right now, Jennifer. And of course, we know how to get in touch with you, and we will include your slides in the slide deck
Sure.
to share. So your
Yeah, I can make
contact.
sure you have those. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. But I would encourage you, if you haven't used the service yet, to check it out, test it out. But we do receive a number of requests, as I said, from employment service providers, literacy and basic skills, and also economic developers, definitely heavy users of the service.
That's wonderful. That's all of who our audience is today.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jennifer. All right. Well, we are coming to the part where I am going to be taking over. Thank you very much to all our guest speakers today. That is quite a bit of data download. Again, we will be sharing that information with you because I am sure there will be a need to go back and review. So welcome everyone. I'm Kelly McKenna. I am the new Executive Director of the Simcoe Muskoka Workforce Development Board and Literacy Network. As you may, oh sorry, I wanted to just share my screen, but I'm not sure if I am, so hold on. Just share my screen. I'm actually sharing you, aren't I? There we go. So yes, so thank you again for joining us. I'm Kelly McKenna, the new Executive Director of our amalgamated organizations. I've had the privilege of working with many of you and collaborating with many of you throughout my years of work in Simcoe and Muskoka. I have a background, for those of you who don't know me, in economic development, and that background was really focused on workforce and skills development. In fact, most of my local work has been focused on the skilled trades. I have been a part-time faculty member at Georgian College, as well as a special assistant to our local MPP. Aussi, je parle français, je suis bilingue, alors j'ai hâte de vous servir en français aussi. I am really looking forward to working with all of you, and as soon as these restrictions start to lift, maybe even in person. So in 2021, there has been a lot of transitions, not just with COVID and business and employment and training, but also with our organization. Our organization has been in transition with a fruition of a plan to amalgamate our two organizations, our Simcoe Workforce Development Board and the Simcoe Muskoka Literacy Network, into one organization. The impetus for this amalgamation was several years ago as a result of a determination to create just one organization that would be able to serve Simcoe and Muskoka's workforce and training needs in a unique and fiscally responsible way. We are currently undertaking a strategic planning process to help us form our new amalgamated vision, mission, values, and hopefully a new name. As we continue to adjust to this new normal in both learning and employment, the board of directors, our team and staff, including myself, remain committed to providing the same high quality services that you've been used to and are really hallmarks of both of our two founding organizations. So stay tuned for more to come. In fact, two training programs that were born from our workforce and literacy partnerships are the Soft Skills Solutions and the Ready for Trades assessment tool. These are two programs that I wanted to just take a few minutes to remind everyone because they are currently getting updated and some new information to share. So if you're not aware, Soft Skills Solutions is a 25 to 30 hour employability skills training program for youth and adults. And this training came about really after extensive research with employers to know what were the skills necessary to be successful in today's workforce. And I think we saw even from Tom's employability survey, we saw some employability skills, showing up to work, answering emails as the #1 skill set that employers were looking for. Well, this year, we have explored even delivering this soft skills solutions to employers in our region, which is a very exciting addition. Currently, our soft skills solution is undergoing a DEI for diversity, equity, and inclusion update, and we will be ready for relaunch in early spring of this year. The other program we're really very proud of is our Ready for Trades fast assessment tool. It's based on the program I think everyone knows as ERAT, which is the Evaluating Academic Readiness for Apprenticeship Training. However, we've taken the paper-based ERAT and put it online so it's easy to use for both students and trainers. This assessment tool basically helps students who wish to pursue apprenticeship training in the skilled trades. And the program assesses skills in these 3 subjects: math, communications, and concepts of science for each of the designated trades. By completing these assessments, the students can determine if their area of additional study required for success, if there is an additional requirement for in-school components for their chosen trade. These assessments are taken with an instructor, an employment counselor, a school guidance teacher, and they're intended to help increase the success rate for those entering into the apprenticeship. If you want to find out any more about either 2 of these programs, please don't hesitate to contact us. The next thing I wanted to invite you to is a Workforce Connect conference, April 5th and 6th. We are excited to be co-hosting the virtual workforce conference. It's going to focus on future-proofing your talent strategy in order to help attract and retain your workforces. We will be having Andrew Au as our guest speaker. He'll be discussing the future of work. And Andrew has helped many companies like Microsoft and FedEx to transform and future-proof their businesses. We will also be hosting virtual roundtables and networking sessions over the 2 mornings. So please join up, or please sign up and join us. So we've covered a lot of information this morning that might not all stick, but just to remind you, we have the videos available to watch on our website. We will share the presentation slides. And also our local labor market plan is available for download in French and English. So I'd like to take just a moment to thank our special guests for presenting today. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize our employment and training consultant in Barrie with the Ministry of Labor, Training, Skills and Development. Brian Hoysa is with us today. I'd also like to recognize our board members. I'm going to stop because I do want to see them. So with us today, I'd also like to recognize our board members. We have Charlotte Parliament, who is chair of our board. We have Carl Prasad, who's been with us for a decade now, so thank you. We have Mylène as well, one of our board members. Mylène is here with us. And this is how dedicated our board members are. We even had a past board member, oh, Mylène, hello. We even had one of our past board members, Kelly Scott, join us for most of this morning because she was still enjoying the labor market data. So thank you to all of you. And a very special thanks, of course, to my team. And I'm going to get them to come on board and wave. We have Judith, Stephanie, and Sherry. our team here at the Workforce Development Board and Literacy Network. So thank you to all of you as well for today. We would very much appreciate if you could take a few moments to complete our survey. Now that the chat is working, we will pop the survey into the chat. And if you want to take a few minutes now, please do so. We'll also do a follow-up email. But if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes, your feedback and insights, there's some in-depth questions, but your insights post the event will be very helpful for us in planning the next one. So please, if you can, take the moment to do that. All right, well, that ends a little earlier than predicted. So I will just open it up. If there's any questions or comments from our guests today, we'll be happy to answer them. And if not, thank you all for joining us. It's been a pleasure to see many familiar faces again. And we will be looking forward to seeing you in person in the coming months.